What is beauty worth? In a world that values perfect features and flawless appearances, what happens to those deemed too plain to be loved? Today's story will take you to the untamed Montana territory of 1882, where a woman's journey for love leads to heartbreak at a dusty train station and an unexpected second chance with a man whose scars run deeper than his skin. This is the tale of a mail-order bride abandoned for being too plain, and the scarred blacksmith who saw the beauty others were blind to. Their story will remind us all that true sight comes not from our eyes, but from our hearts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The whistle of the locomotive pierced the spring air as the Northern Pacific train pulled into Riverdale Station. Steam billowed across the wooden platform in great clouds, momentarily obscuring the small Montana settlement from view. When the vapor cleared, the town revealed itself, a cluster of wooden buildings stretched along a wide dirt road with mountains rising majestically in the distance. Among the disembarking passengers stood Sarah Miller, her gloved hands clutching both a worn leather satchel and a letter that had traveled with her across 3 states. The paper was creased from countless readings, the ink beginning to fade at the folds. Still, she knew every word by heart. A good woman of practical nature and sound character would find a welcome home and respectful partnership here in Montana territory. Sarah took a deep breath of the unfamiliar western air, filling her lungs with the scent of pine, dust, and possibility. At 32, she had crossed a threshold most women of her time dreaded. The age where spinster was whispered behind fans and family gatherings became exercises in pity. Not that she had much family left to endure such gatherings. Her father's passing had left her alone in the world, with nothing but his modest bookshop as inheritance. She smoothed her grey traveling dress with nervous hands. It was her finest garment, though the years had dulled its once sharp tailoring. The dress, like its wearer, was serviceable rather than striking. Sarah had never been beautiful, a fact pointed out with varying degrees of kindness throughout her life. Her features were even but unremarkable, her brown hair pulled back in, a practical style that did nothing to enhance her nondescript hazel eyes. Her mother had once called her appearance restful, a polite way of saying forgettable. But James Wilson hadn't seemed concerned with appearance in his letters. Over 6 months of correspondence, he had written of his successful cattle ranch, his standing in the community, and his desire for a sensible wife to share his prosperity. He'd emphasized character over beauty, practicality over passion. Sarah had responded honestly about her own virtues, her education, her experience running her father's shop, her even temperament and domestic skills. Now, standing on the platform with her worldly possessions in one satchel, Sarah scanned the crowd. She had sold everything, the bookshop, her father's house, nearly all her belongings, to make this journey. There was no going back. She spotted him immediately standing apart from the crowd. James Wilson matched the description he'd provided perfectly. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a dark mustache and clear blue eyes. He was handsome in a conventional way, well-dressed in a new suit that spoke of prosperity, his hat held respectfully in his hands as he surveyed the passengers. Their eyes met across the platform, and for one suspended moment, hope bloomed in Sarah's chest. Then she watched as his expression shifted from anticipation to unmistakable disappointment. The change was subtle, a slight fall of his shoulders, a tightening around his mouth, but to Sarah, who had spent a lifetime reading such signals, it might as well have been a shout. Still, she steeled herself and approached him, her back straight despite the weight of his disapproval. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Sarah Miller." He removed his hat in a gesture of politeness that couldn't mask the frown now creasing his forehead. "Miss Miller, "Welcome to Riverdale." His gaze traveled over her face, her plain dress, her simple appearance, and with each passing second, his disappointment seemed to deepen, hardening into something like resentment. "You look..." He hesitated, visibly searching for words. "Different than I expected." Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes steadily. "My letters described my character, Mr. Wilson, not my appearance." "Yes, but..." He glanced around, noting several townspeople watching them with undisguised curiosity. A group of cowboys leaning against the general store had stopped their conversation to observe the interaction. "Miss Miller, I mean no offense, but I had hoped for someone more suitable to represent my standing in the community." The words struck like a physical blow, but Sarah had long practiced hiding such wounds. "Suitable? You're rather plain, Miss Miller." His voice lowered confidentially, as though sharing an unfortunate truth she might have somehow missed about herself. "I'm one of the most prosperous ranchers in the territory. My wife will be expected to host gatherings to make an impression." Sarah stood perfectly still, aware of the stares from onlookers at nearby shops. The cowboys didn't bother hiding their amusement at what was clearly becoming a public rejection. "I see," she said quietly. "And you didn't think to mention this requirement in your letters?" James sighed heavily, as though she were being deliberately difficult. "I assumed..." "Well, it doesn't matter what I assumed. I'll arrange for your return ticket. The eastbound train comes through in 3 days." "I've sold everything to come here," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her. "There's nothing to go back to." "That's unfortunate," he replied, already stepping away. "I'll send word to the hotel about your ticket." With that, he turned and walked toward his waiting carriage, leaving Sarah alone on the platform with her satchel, the curious stares of strangers, and the distant laughter of the cowboys. "Looks like Wilson's mail-order bride wasn't what he ordered," one called out, prompting more laughter. Sarah lifted her chin and walked away from the station, her mind racing. 3 days until the eastbound train. 3 days to figure out what to do with the rest of her life, with no home and only the money in her purse, enough for perhaps 2 nights at the modest hotel she could see down the street. Every step felt heavier than the last as the reality of her situation settled on her shoulders. She had gambled everything on this new beginning, and in less than 5 minutes of arrival, that future had disappeared like the train's steam in the mountain air. The Riverdale Inn stood 2 stories tall, its weathered sign creaking gently in the breeze. Sarah approached the front desk, where a woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from her ledger. "Room for 1, please," Sarah said, reaching for her purse. "Just for tonight, for now." The woman studied her with shrewd eyes. "You'd be Miss Miller, I reckon." Sarah stiffened. "News travels fast." "It's a small town, honey. Not much happens that everyone doesn't know before sundown." The innkeeper's expression softened slightly. "I'm Eliza Hathaway. 2 bits a night includes breakfast, suppers extra." Sarah counted out the coins carefully. Each one represented a step closer to destitution. "Word of advice," Mrs. Hathaway said, sliding a key across the counter. "James Wilson's done this before. You're not the first he's sent packing for not matching whatever picture he had in his head." The knowledge that she wasn't unique even in her rejection somehow made it worse. "Thank you for telling me." "Rooms at the top of the stairs, last on the left. Clean sheets, nothing fancy." By evening, Sarah had settled into the sparse room, unpacking the few belongings that remained of her former life. A change of clothes, her father's pocket watch, a small volume of Emerson's essays, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring out the window at the unfamiliar town bathed in the golden light of sunset. The vastness of the Montana landscape seemed to mock her predicament. So much open space, and yet nowhere for her to go. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since morning on the train. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The dining room downstairs would be serving supper, but the thought of facing more curious stares was unbearable. Instead, she unwrapped a piece of bread saved from the train and ate it slowly, washing it down with water from the pitcher. As darkness fell, Sarah's practical nature reasserted itself. Self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She needed a plan. By the dim light of the room's single lamp, she counted her remaining money. Enough for 2 more nights at the inn, perhaps. 3 if she skipped meals. Not enough for a ticket eastward, even if she had somewhere to go. 3 days to find work then. 3 days to carve out some kind of existence in this town that had already rejected her. Sarah Miller had never considered herself particularly brave, but neither was she a woman who surrendered easily. Her father had taught her that much. The next morning, Sarah rose with the sun. If she had only 3 days, she would use them wisely. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a serviceable brown wool, and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Hathaway was already at her post, pouring coffee for the early risers in the small dining room. "Morning," the innkeeper nodded. "Help yourself to porridge if you're hungry." Sarah hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping you might know of work available in town. Temporary, at least." Mrs. Hathaway set down the coffee pot and studied her thoughtfully. "Wilson sent you back, did he? Not the first time he's done that, though usually they're too old or too opinionated. Too plain is a new one." Sarah's cheeks burned. "I'm not going back east. I need to find something here, or in another town nearby." Mrs. Hathaway sighed. "Not much call for shopkeepers or teachers this time of year. Most hiring happens before winter or after spring planting." She hesitated. "Though Nathan Green might need help. His shop assistant left last week." "Nathan Green? The blacksmith. His shop's at the edge of town, past the livery." Her expression turned guarded. "Mind you, he's not the easiest man to work for. Keeps to himself mostly, since the accident." Sarah thanked her and accepted a cup of coffee and bowl of porridge. Before setting out, she followed the main street past the general store, the bank, and a small church. The blacksmith shop sat apart from other buildings, the rhythmic clanging of metal on metal growing louder as she approached. The forge occupied an open-fronted building with a stone chimney from which smoke rose steadily. Heat radiated from the entrance, along with the distinctive smell of hot metal and coal. Sarah paused at the doorway, momentarily hesitant. She had never been inside a smithy before. A large man stood with his back to her, hammering a glowing piece of metal on an anvil. His broad shoulders strained against a leather apron, his movements powerful and precise. At her footsteps, he turned. Sarah couldn't prevent the small intake of breath. The right side of his face was handsome. Strong jaw, straight nose, intelligent green eyes. The left side bore the evidence of severe burns, the skin puckered and scarred from cheekbone to collar. A black patch covered where his left eye should have been. "Help you with something?" His voice was deep and abrupt, his expression guarded as he noted her reaction. Sarah gathered herself quickly. "Mrs. Hathaway at the inn mentioned you might need assistance in your shop." Nathan Green's good eye narrowed. "Did she now? And who might you be?" "Sarah Miller. I arrived yesterday." Recognition flickered across his face. "Wilson's mail-order bride. Word travels fast in Riverdale." Sarah's lips tightened. "I'm not anyone's bride, Mr. Green. I'm a woman who needs work." To her surprise, a hint of a smile touched the undamaged corner of his mouth. "Oh, what can you do, Miss Miller?" "I ran my father's bookshop for 10 years after his health failed. I can manage accounts, keep inventory, serve customers." She paused. "I'm stronger than I look, and I learn quickly." Nathan rested the hammer against the anvil, studying her with unexpected intensity. "A bookshop isn't a smithy," he observed. "No, but business is business, and I suspect you'd rather be working iron than writing in ledgers." There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the soft hiss of hot metal cooling in the bucket of water beside the forge. Nathan's expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "I can't pay much, and it's hot, dirty work." "I'm not afraid of either," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze steadily. He nodded once. "Decision made. Be here at dawn tomorrow. We'll see if you can do what you claim." Sarah arrived before dawn the next morning, finding Nathan already at work, the forge glowing orange in the pre-dawn darkness. The smithy looked different in this light, almost otherworldly, with shadows dancing across the walls and sparks flying from the metal Nathan shaped with methodical precision. He acknowledged her with a nod and gestured toward a small desk in the corner, piled high with papers and ledgers. "That's where the last fellow kept the accounts. Can't make sense of his system." Nathan's tone suggested he hadn't tried very hard. "Need to know what supplies we're low on, what orders are outstanding, who's paid and who hasn't." Sarah set her satchel down and removed her shawl, rolling up her sleeves. The chaotic pile of papers was daunting, but familiar in its way. Her father's bookkeeping had been similarly disorganized until she'd taken over. By mid-morning, Sarah had begun to establish order from the chaos. The ledgers revealed a thriving business. Nathan's skill as a blacksmith was clearly in demand, with orders for everything from horseshoes to specialized farming tools to ornamental ironwork. She worked steadily, occasionally asking questions when she encountered something unfamiliar. Nathan's responses were terse but informative. He seemed to appreciate that she didn't waste words or require repeated explanations. Throughout the day, a steady stream of customers came to the forge. Sarah noted how they interacted with Nathan, with respect for his skill but obvious discomfort at his appearance. Many avoided looking directly at him, instead addressing their requests to the floor or increasingly to Sarah. After one such customer left, a well-dressed rancher who had spoken exclusively to Sarah while glancing nervously at Nathan's scarred profile. Sarah couldn't contain her frustration. "Do they always stare at everything except your face?" Nathan's hand paused on the bellows. "Yes. It's rude. It's human nature. People fear what reminds them of their own fragility." He returned to his work, conversation clearly over. The day passed in a blur of heat, soot, and exhaustion. By evening, Sarah's arms ached from reaching for heavy ledgers. Her dress was smudged with coal dust, and she had never felt more accomplished. Nathan counted out her day's wages, fair if modest. "You did well," he said simply. "Tomorrow at dawn, if you're still interested." Sarah returned to the inn, ate a hearty meal in the dining room, unconcerned now about curious glances, and fell into dreamless sleep. The next day followed the same pattern, hard work alongside the taciturn blacksmith, whose gruff exterior occasionally revealed flashes of dry humor and exceptional intelligence. She discovered that Nathan had organized his tools with meticulous precision, that he could look at a piece of raw metal and envision the finished product with remarkable clarity, that he preferred working in silence but didn't mind when she hummed quietly as she updated the ledgers. On the afternoon of the third day, when the eastbound train was scheduled to depart, Sarah was carefully recording a transaction when James Wilson himself entered the smithy. He stopped short at the sight of her behind the counter, her face smudged with soot, her sleeves rolled up. "Miss Miller," he said stiffly, "I've arranged your ticket back east. The train leaves in an hour." From the forge, Nathan straightened. to his full height, watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. The hammer in his hand seemed suddenly more prominent. "That's very considerate, Mr. Wilson," Sarah replied calmly, "but I won't be needing it. I found employment here in Riverdale." Wilson's expression hardened, his gaze taking in her soot-stained dress and disheveled appearance with obvious disapproval. "Working in a smithy is hardly suitable for a woman. What will people think?" "I don't much care what people think," Sarah said, "and neither does Mr. Green. You can't seriously intend to stay and work for—" Wilson's gaze flicked dismissively toward Nathan, not finishing the sentence. Nathan stepped forward, his scarred face impressive in the forge light. "For what, Wilson? A man like me?" Wilson took an involuntary step back. "This isn't proper, Miss Miller. A single woman working alone with—" "Thank you for your concern," Sarah interrupted, "but my propriety is not your responsibility, not anymore." After an uncomfortable silence, Wilson left. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she returned to her bookkeeping, the numbers swimming before her eyes. "You should have taken the ticket," Nathan said quietly. "Better opportunities back east for a woman like you." "A plain woman, you mean?" Sarah kept her eyes on the ledger. "An intelligent one." She looked up then, surprised by the simple honesty in his voice. Nathan turned back to the forge, as though uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "The people in this town, they see what they expect to see, nothing more." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Sarah found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the capable hands that created such beautiful work from unyielding metal. The scars didn't disturb her, as they seemed to disturb others. They were simply part of him, like the calluses on his fingers or the occasional limp she'd noticed when he was tired. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Mrs. Hathaway mentioned an accident." Nathan was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as though recounting someone else's story. "I was a teacher before the war, came west afterward, started a small school here in Riverdale." His hands continued working as he spoke, shaping the glowing metal with precise strokes. "Fire broke out during lessons. Got the children out, went back for the last one. A little girl who'd hidden under the floorboards. Roof collapsed as we were leaving." Sarah's breath caught at the matter-of-fact recounting of such heroism. The child. She lived. Pretty little thing, married with children of her own now. A faint smile ghosted across his face. "She brings me cookies every Christmas. Only one in town who looks me straight in the eye." "And you became a blacksmith," he shrugged. "Couldn't go. Back to teaching. Parents didn't want their children frightened by my face. Had to do something, and I'd always had a knack for working with my hands." The simplicity of the statement, free from self-pity or resentment, touched something deep in Sarah's chest. "Their loss," she said quietly. "You must have been a fine teacher." Nathan looked up, genuine surprise flickering across his features. Then he gave a short nod, as if accepting a gift he hadn't expected, and returned to his work. Days turned into weeks. Sarah's temporary position became permanent. She moved from the inn to a small room above the dressmaker's shop and settled into life in Riverdale. She and Nathan developed an efficient working relationship, his craftsmanship complemented by her organizational skills and customer service. The business thrived. The dusty ledgers revealed their secrets under Sarah's methodical attention. Nathan had significantly undercharged some customers and forgotten to bill others entirely. With her careful records, the forge's profits increased substantially. Nathan used the additional income to purchase better materials and tools, expanding his offerings to include more decorative pieces alongside the practical items that were the staple of his business. Sarah learned more about Nathan as the seasons changed, that he read voraciously, that he could quote Shakespeare from memory, that he carved intricate wooden chess pieces in the evenings. Sometimes they played chess after closing the shop, the pieces moving silently across the board in the quiet forge, their conversations sparse but comfortable. In turn, Nathan learned about Sarah, that she knew Latin and Greek from studying with her scholarly father, that she could identify nearly any literary quotation, that she had a quiet, understated sense of humor that emerged when she felt at ease. As summer turned to autumn, Sarah noticed subtle changes in how the townspeople treated them both. Her association with Nathan had initially marked her as an oddity, but her efficient management of the business and pleasant demeanor gradually won acceptance. Some even began to look Nathan in the face when speaking to him, following Sarah's example. One evening, as they worked late to finish an important order for elaborate iron gates commissioned by the new bank building, Sarah noticed Nathan watching her with an odd expression. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her quill. "You've changed," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Have I?" "You stand differently. Speak differently." Sarah considered this. She had noticed her dresses fitting more loosely as the physical work of the forge strengthened her, but Nathan seemed to be referring to something deeper. "I suppose I'm not trying to disappear anymore," she said finally. "You were before? Plain girls learn to make themselves smaller, Mr. Green. Less noticeable means less disappointment for everyone." He shook his head, the forge light catching the planes of his face. "You were never plain." The words, spoken so matter-of-factly, caught her off guard. "You don't need to say that." "I don't say things I don't mean," he replied gruffly. "Plain is what people call something they haven't bothered to look at properly." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the forge. She turned back to her ledger, but the numbers blurred before her eyes. The autumn days grew shorter, the nights colder. Nathan fashioned a small stove for the corner where Sarah worked, ensuring she wouldn't be chilled as winter approached. The gesture, practical but thoughtful, spoke volumes to Sarah about how their partnership had evolved. 6 months after her arrival in Riverdale, Sarah was serving a customer when James Wilson entered the shop again. He removed his hat, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Miss Miller, might I have a word?" Sarah finished with her customer before turning to him. "Yes, Mr. Wilson. I've been thinking about our arrangement. Perhaps I was hasty in my judgment." He glanced around. The prospering shop, taking in the organized shelves, the new sign outside, the steady stream of customers. "You've proven yourself capable, respectable. My offer of marriage remains open should you reconsider." Behind him, Nathan had gone very still at the forge, his back rigid, his hands gripping the hammer with unusual force. Sarah studied James. Wilson, handsome, wealthy, and utterly blind to anything beyond appearances. 6 months ago, his offer would have seemed her only chance at security. Now, it felt like a step backward into darkness. "No, thank you, Mr. Wilson," she said quietly. "I'm quite happy with my life as it is." Wilson's surprise was evident. He looked around the smithy, at the soot-stained walls, the blazing forge, the simple furnishings, with obvious disbelief. "You'd rather work in this place with him?" He nodded toward Nathan. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "I would." After Wilson left, the silence in the shop was heavy with unspoken words. Nathan returned to his hammering with unusual force, each strike ringing through the space like a declaration. "You should have accepted," he said finally, not looking at her. "He could give you a proper life." "And what would be the cost of that proper life?" Sarah asked. "To be valued for how I look standing beside him? To be an ornament in his fine house?" "You deserve better than this," Nathan gestured to the smithy to himself. "Better than honest work? Better than being seen for who I am?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. Better than being with someone who actually looks at me. Nathan turned toward her then, his expression fierce. And what do I see, Sarah? Everything, she whispered. You see everything. The hammer dropped from his hand as he crossed to her. His scarred hand hesitated before gently touching her cheek, as though he feared she might pull away. There's a social at the church Saturday next, he said, the words coming with difficulty. Would you consider attending with me? Sarah covered his rough hand with hers. People will talk. Let them, he said. I stopped caring what people see long ago. As did I, she replied, the day I found where I belong. On Saturday evening, the church social hall glowed with lamplight, the warm radiance spilling onto the dirt road outside. Fiddle music drifted through open windows, accompanied by laughter and the steady rhythm of boots on wooden floorboards. Sarah stood beside Nathan at the edge of the property, her hand resting lightly on his offered arm. She wore her best dress, the grey one she'd arrived in, now carefully altered and adorned with a simple lace collar borrowed from Mrs. Finch, the dressmaker. Nathan had dressed in a clean black suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, as though it had been tailored for someone else. The patch over his missing eye had been replaced with a newer one, and his usually unkempt hair was combed neatly back from his forehead. We don't have to do this, Sarah said softly, noting how his good eye kept darting toward the doorway, where couples and families streamed into the brightly lit hall. Yes, we do. His voice was firm despite the tension, evident in his posture. Can't hide in the forge forever. Is that what we've been doing? She smiled up at him. Hiding? Nathan's expression softened momentarily. Maybe I have been, for years. He took a deep breath. Ready? Sarah nodded, and they began walking toward the hall. She felt the weight of curious stares as they approached, heard the murmurs that rippled through the crowd gathered on the porch. It had been half a year since her arrival in Riverdale, but tonight marked her first real appearance in the town's social life, and Nathan's first in longer than anyone could remember. Mrs. Hathaway was the first to greet them, stepping forward, with a warm smile that did much to ease the awkwardness of the moment. Nathan Green, I never thought I'd see the day. And Miss Miller, don't you look lovely? Her gaze swept over them both with undisguised approval. Come in, come in. The dancing's just started. Inside, the hall was transformed by autumn decorations. Dried corn husks arranged artfully around support posts, pumpkins and gourds lining the refreshment tables, paper lanterns casting a golden glow over everything. Nearly everyone in Riverdale seemed to be present, from grey-haired elders to young children running between the legs of adults. The music paused briefly as they entered, conversations faltering as heads turned in their direction. Sarah felt Nathan's arm stiffen beneath her hand, but he continued forward, nodding politely to those he recognized. Gradually, the music resumed, and the moment of scrutiny passed. Though sidelong glances and whispered comments continued, they found seats along the wall, where they could observe the festivities without being at the center of attention. Sarah recognized many of the faces from the forge, customers who had initially spoken only to her, but who now acknowledged Nathan with a nod or even a greeting. Progress, however small. Cider? Nathan asked, gesturing toward the refreshment table. That would be lovely, thank you. As Nathan made his way across the crowded room, Sarah noticed how people subtly moved aside, creating a path. Not out of respect, she thought sadly, but out of discomfort. Nathan seemed not to notice, or perhaps had simply grown accustomed to such treatment over the years. Never thought I'd see him here again. The voice belonged to Elijah Porter, the elderly proprietor of the general store, who had settled onto the bench beside Sarah. Not since the fire. He saved those children, Sarah said. I'd think he'd be welcomed as a hero. Porter nodded slowly. He was, at first. But people have short memories for heroism and long ones for discomfort. His face reminds them that bad things happen to good people, and most folks don't like being reminded of that. He studied Sarah with curious eyes. You don't seem bothered by it. By his scars. Why would I be? They're just skin. Porter chuckled. You're a refreshing change around here, Miss Miller. Most women who came looking for James Wilson were after his money and position. When they didn't measure up to his expectations, they left on the next train east. I had nowhere to go back to, Sarah admitted. Lucky for Nathan, then. Porter's eyes twinkled. And lucky for you, too, I'd wager. Before Sarah could respond, Nathan returned with 2 cups of cider, nodding respectfully to Porter as the older man excused himself. They sat in companionable silence, watching the dancers whirl to the lively fiddle music. Young couples dominated the floor, their movements confident and energetic, while older married pairs kept to the edges, their steps more measured but no less in harmony. I don't remember the last time I danced, Sarah confessed, her fingers tapping lightly against her cup in time with the music. Nathan glanced at her, hesitation clear in his expression. Would you like to? Dance, I mean. The question surprised her. I'm not very good at it. Neither am I. A rare smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, especially now. Depth perception isn't what it used to be. Sarah laughed softly. Then we'll be poorly coordinated together. The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Nathan set aside his cup, standing and offering his hand. The gesture was awkward, unpracticed, but sincere. Sarah placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. They moved stiffly at first, her hand light on his shoulder, his resting hesitantly at her waist. There was a careful distance between them, proper and uncertain. Nathan counted under his breath, his brow furrowed in concentration as he navigated the steps he likely hadn't performed in years. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Sorry, he muttered as he narrowly avoided stepping on her foot. It's all right, Sarah assured him, her own movements far from graceful. No one's watching. But of course, everyone was. From the corner of her eye, Sarah could see the sidelong glances, the whispered comments behind hands. Some expressions showed surprise, others curiosity, and a few displayed unmistakable disapproval. Gradually, however, the music worked its gentle magic. Their steps became more coordinated, the stiffness in their postures easing as they found a shared rhythm. Nathan stopped counting, his focus shifting from their feet to her face. The warmth of his hand at her waist steadied her, guiding her through turns with surprising grace. You're better at this than you claimed, Sarah observed, surprised by the ease with which they now moved together. Good partner, he replied simply. As the waltz continued, Sarah became aware of a shift in the atmosphere. The stares had not ceased, but they had changed in quality. There was something like wonder in some faces now, particularly among the older residents. She caught Mrs. Hathaway nudging Porter and nodding approvingly in their direction. When the music ended, they remained for a moment on the floor, something unspoken passing between them before they stepped apart. Nathan's hand lingered on hers a second longer than necessary, a gesture so subtle that only Sarah noticed. They returned to their seats, and to Sarah's surprise, they were soon joined by others. Mrs. Finch, with questions about an order for iron curtain rods, Mr. Collins inquiring about repairs to his plough, Mrs. Hathaway bringing them fresh cider and compliments on their dancing. Conversation flowed more easily than Sarah had anticipated, with Nathan contributing terse but thoughtful responses when addressed directly. Later in the evening, as the social was winding down, Sarah stepped outside to enjoy a moment of cool night air. The stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright in the clear Montana sky. She had never seen so many stars in her life before coming west, had never truly understood the vastness of the heavens when viewed from city streets. "Beautiful night," came a familiar voice. Sarah turned to find James Wilson standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable in the shadows. He was immaculately dressed as always, his posture rigid with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Yes, it is," she agreed cautiously. "You surprised everyone by coming. Tonight, with Green." "Did I? I wasn't aware our attendance would cause such a stir." Wilson moved closer, his face now illuminated by the light spilling from the hall windows. "People talk, Sarah. A respectable woman like yourself, working in a forge, attending socials, with..." He gestured vaguely, the implication clear. "With Nathan." Sarah supplied the name firmly. "A respectable businessman and a hero who saved children from a burning building. Yes, I can see why that would cause talk." Wilson's jaw tightened. "You know that's not what I mean. His appearance is irrelevant to his character," Sarah interrupted. "Something I wish more people in this town would recognize. You could still have a normal life," Wilson said, his voice lowered. "My offer stands. A proper home, respect in the community, children, eventually. Everything a woman should want." Sarah studied him, this handsome man who had once represented all her hopes for the future. She tried to imagine the life he described. A comfortable home, financial security, social standing. It should have been appealing. Instead, she felt only a profound emptiness at the thought. "There was a time when I might have accepted that offer, Mr. Wilson, when I believed that security and respectability were all I could hope for. But that time has passed." Wilson's face hardened. "Because of him? Because he's filled your head with..." "Because of me," Sarah said firmly. "Nathan hasn't filled my head with anything except the knowledge that I'm capable of more than I ever believed, that I have value beyond being someone's wife or ornament. He can't give you the life you deserve. Perhaps not the life you think I deserve, but I've learned that what I deserve and what I want are not the same thing." Wilson stepped closer, his expression tightening with frustration. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. One you'll regret when the novelty wears off and you're left with a scarred, one-eyed blacksmith who can barely look people in the face." "I believe that's enough, Wilson." Nathan's voice came from the doorway. Quiet but unyielding, he moved to Sarah's side, not touching her but standing close enough that his presence was a tangible force. Wilson's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip, a gesture so quick that Sarah might have missed it had she not been watching him closely. Nathan noticed too, his body tensing beside her. "This doesn't concern you, Green." "Sarah concerns me," Nathan replied evenly, "and it seems to me she's made her wishes clear." For a tense moment, Wilson's hand remained near his weapon, his face flushed with anger. Then gradually his posture relaxed, though his expression remained cold. "Have it your way," he said finally, "but don't come looking for help when you realize what you've thrown away." He turned and strode toward his waiting carriage, shoulders rigid with wounded pride. When he had gone, Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was tense. Nathan's expression was grim. Man like that doesn't like losing, especially not to someone like me. "You didn't win anything," Sarah said softly, "because I wasn't his to lose in the first place." Nathan looked down at her, his good eye reflecting the starlight. "No," he agreed quietly. "You never were." They walked home in companionable silence, the events of the evening settling between them like a shared secret. The town was quiet now, most residents having returned to their homes. A dog barked in the distance, and somewhere an owl called mournfully. "Thank you," Sarah said, Finally, as they approached the dressmaker's shop where her rented room waited. For what? For taking me to the social, for dancing with me, for... She hesitated. For seeing me. Nathan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, the contrast between the scarred and unscarred sides of his face was less pronounced, giving him an almost mythical appearance, a man half in shadow, half in light. "I should be thanking you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the first person in years who looks at me without flinching." Sarah reached up hesitantly, her fingers gently touching the scarred side of his face. Nathan went very still, his breathing shallow. "These are the marks of courage," she said softly, "of a life lived with purpose. How could I flinch from that?" Nathan covered her hand with his own, pressing it more firmly against his cheek for a brief moment before stepping back. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Nathan." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Sarah's mind was filled with the memory of rough skin beneath her fingertips, of the vulnerability in Nathan's eye as he allowed her touch. Something had shifted between them tonight, something profound and irreversible. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the first real hint of winter in the air. Sarah arrived at the forge to find Nathan already at work, hammering with focused intensity. They exchanged brief greetings, settling into their usual routine with practiced ease. Yet there was a new awareness between them, a heightened consciousness of each other's movements, each other's presence. By midday, clouds had gathered over the mountains, and the first snowflakes began to fall, delicate white stars that melted as they touched the heated air near the forge. Sarah paused in her work to watch them through the open doorway, momentarily transported by their silent beauty. "First snow comes early this year," Nathan observed, setting aside his hammer. "Winter will be hard." "Is that a concern?" Sarah asked, noting the seriousness in his expression. "For some." He wiped his hands on a cloth, leaving smudges of soot. "Those who haven't laid in enough firewood or supplies, the elderly living alone." Sarah considered this. "Is there something we can do to help?" Nathan glanced at her, something like surprise flickering across his features. "We, yes we, the forge, you and I." She gestured to the prospering business around them. "We're doing well, aren't we? Better than before I came." "Yes," he admitted. "The books show that clearly, and perhaps we could set aside some of the profit for those who might struggle through winter." Nathan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "There's Widow Perkins up by the creek, and old Sam Turner, who's too proud to ask for help from his daughter in Helena, a few others. We could prepare packages," Sarah suggested, warming to the idea. "Deliver them anonymously so pride isn't wounded." A small smile tugged at Nathan's mouth. "Not so anonymous in a town this size. Everyone would know." "Let them know then," Sarah said firmly. "Let them see that the forge cares for the community, even if parts of the community haven't always cared for the forge." Nathan's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You're a remarkable woman, Sarah Miller." The warmth in his voice brought color to her cheeks, and she turned quickly back to her ledgers. "I'm practical, that's all. A strong community is good for business." But they both knew it was more than that. That evening, they worked late planning their winter assistance program. Sarah compiled a list of vulnerable residents based on Nathan's knowledge of the town, while Nathan calculated how much coal, firewood, and basic supplies they could provide without endangering the forge's financial stability. The snow continued to fall, accumulating in drifts against the walls of the smithy. The forge's warmth created a cocoon of comfort against the encroaching winter, and Sarah found herself reluctant to leave when their work was done. "I should go," she said finally, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "The snow's getting deeper." Nathan looked concerned as he peered out at the white darkness. "I'll walk you." "There's no need." "There is," he said firmly. "Storm's picking up." He was right. What had begun as gentle snowfall had transformed into a genuine blizzard, the wind driving icy flakes horizontally across the landscape. Nathan pulled on his heavy coat and offered Sarah his arm, which she gratefully accepted as they stepped out into the storm. The journey to the dressmaker's shop normally took less than 10 minutes, but tonight it seemed to stretch endlessly. The wind cut through Sarah's shawl as if it were made of paper, and the snow quickly soaked through her boots. Nathan positioned himself between her and the worst of the wind, his bulk providing some shelter from the elements. They had almost reached the shop when Sarah's foot hit a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. She slipped, crying out as her ankle twisted painfully beneath her. Nathan caught her before she could fall completely, his strong hands steadying her. "Are you hurt?" he shouted over the wind. Sarah tried to put weight on her injured foot and winced. "My ankle. I don't think I can walk on it." Without hesitation, Nathan scooped her into his arms. Sarah gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck for balance. He carried her the remaining distance to the shop, his breathing steady. Despite the added burden and the challenging conditions, the shop was dark and cold. Mrs. Finch having closed early due to the storm. The stairs to Sarah's room presented a new challenge, but Nathan navigated them carefully, setting her down only when they reached her door. "Key?" he asked. Sarah fumbled in her pocket with cold fingers, finally producing the small iron key that Nathan had crafted for her when she first took the room. He unlocked the door and helped her inside, settling her on the single chair while he quickly lit the lamp and stove. The room was modest but neat, with a narrow bed, a small table, a chest for clothing, and a bookshelf populated with volumes Sarah had gradually acquired since arriving in Riverdale. Personal touches were few but meaningful. A pressed flower in a frame, a handmade quilt, her parents' daguerreotype on the bedside table. "Let me see your ankle," Nathan said when the stove had begun to radiate heat. Sarah hesitated, then carefully extended her leg. Nathan knelt beside her chair and gently removed her snow-soaked boot, his large hands surprisingly delicate as they examined her rapidly swelling ankle. "Not broken, I think, but a bad sprain." He glanced up at her. "You won't be walking on this tomorrow." "I have to," Sarah protested. "There's work to be done." Nathan shook his head. "The work will wait. You need to rest this." He looked around the room, frowning. "You need ice for the swelling, but there's nothing but snow outside, and your stove is barely warming the room." Sarah became suddenly acutely aware of the intimacy of the situation, alone with Nathan in her private quarters, his hands still cradling her injured foot. Propriety demanded she feel scandalized, but all she felt was safe. "I'll be fine," she assured him, "once I'm warmed up." Nathan reluctantly released her ankle and rose to his feet. "I should go," he said, though he made no move toward the door. "But I don't like leaving you alone with that injury. If you needed something, in the night." Sarah bit her lip, caught between practical need and social convention. "Perhaps. Mrs. Finch is visiting her sister in the next town. No one would know if you stayed, just to make sure I'm all right." The suggestion hung in the air. Between them, loaded with implications neither was quite prepared to address. Nathan's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes. "I could sleep in the chair," he said finally, "just until morning." Sarah nodded, relief and something more complex washing over her. "Thank you." The storm raged on outside, rattling the windows and howling down the chimney. Nathan built up the fire in the small stove, then helped Sarah to her bed, carefully arranging pillows to elevate her injured ankle. He brought her water and found a clean cloth to wrap around the swelling. "You've done this before," Sarah observed as he tied the cloth with practiced ease. "Field medicine during the war," he replied shortly. Learned more than I wanted to about injuries. When Sarah was settled, Nathan removed his boots and outer coat, then settled into the room's single chair, arranging his large frame as comfortably as possible in the confined space. He extinguished the lamp, leaving only the orange glow from the stove's vents to illuminate the room. Sarah lay awake in the darkness, acutely conscious of Nathan's presence across the room. His breathing was deep and even, but she sensed he was as awake as she was, as aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them to this moment. "Nathan," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." There was a pause before. He replied, his voice rough with emotion, "Get some sleep, Sarah." Morning arrived with brilliant clarity, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Sunlight streamed through the frosted window, casting rainbow patterns on the opposite wall. Sarah awoke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the sight of Nathan asleep in her chair, his head tilted at an angle that would surely leave him with a stiff neck. As if sensing her gaze, he stirred, blinking in the bright light. Their eyes met across the small room, and something passed between them, acknowledgement of a boundary crossed, of a new intimacy neither had anticipated. "How's the ankle?" Nathan asked, his voice rough with sleep. Sarah carefully moved her foot, wincing slightly. "Better, I think, still sore." Nathan rose and stretched, his large frame seeming to fill the small room. "I should go. People will be stirring soon." Sarah nodded, understanding the concern for her reputation. "Will you open the forge today?" "No," he decided. "Snow's too deep. Roads will need clearing before customers can reach us." He hesitated. "I'll bring you something to eat later and check on your ankle." "Thank you." After Nathan had gone, carefully checking that no one was about to witness his departure from her room, Sarah sat in quiet contemplation. The events of the past day, the social, the confrontation with Wilson, the injury, Nathan's protective care, had shifted something fundamental between them. There was no going back to the simple employer-employee relationship they had initially established. The question was, where were they going instead? The answer began to reveal itself over the days that followed. As Sarah's ankle healed, Nathan visited daily, bringing food, books, and news from town. He worked on small projects at her table, intricate, iron pieces that required detail work rather than the forge's heat. They talked more than they ever had at the smithy, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams that had been deferred, losses that had shaped them. Sarah learned that Nathan had been engaged before the war, but his fiancée had married another while he was away fighting. He'd come west to escape the memories, only to find new pain in the schoolhouse fire that had scarred him physically as it had been scarred emotionally by war. Nathan learned that Sarah had once been courted by a young man from a good family, but his parents had deemed her too common, too plain for their son. That rejection had been the first of many that shaped her belief that she was somehow insufficient, unworthy of the love others seemed to find so easily. "They were wrong," Nathan said firmly when she shared this story. "All of them. The fault was in their vision, not in you." A week after her injury, Sarah returned to the forge, limping slightly, but determined to resume her duties. She found the place transformed. Nathan had reorganized the workspace, creating a more comfortable area for her desk and ledgers, with better light and a second stove to ensure she wouldn't be cold as winter deepened. "You didn't need to do all this," she said, touched by the consideration the changes represented. "Wanted to," he replied simply, returning to his work as if embarrassed by his own thoughtfulness. Life settled into a new pattern. During the day, they worked side by side as always, their professional rhythm unaltered. But in the evenings, Nathan often accompanied Sarah to her room, where they would share a simple meal, read together, or play chess. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but neither of them particularly cared anymore about the opinions of others. As Christmas approached, Riverdale transformed itself with festive decorations. Even the harshest winter couldn't dampen the town's determination to celebrate, and the social calendar filled with parties, pageants, and special church services. Sarah and Nathan continued their plan to help the town's vulnerable residents, preparing packages of coal, food, and necessities that were discreetly delivered before dawn. Their generosity didn't go unnoticed, and gradually, attitudes toward Nathan began to shift. Invitations arrived for both of them, to Christmas dinner, at the Porters, to the children's pageant at the church, to the New Year's dance at the town hall. To Sarah's surprise, Nathan accepted most of these invitations. He remained reserved in company, but no longer avoided social gatherings entirely. And always they attended together, a pair whose connection was becoming increasingly evident to everyone in Riverdale. It was at the Christmas Eve service that everything changed. The small church was filled to capacity, glowing with candlelight and adorned with evergreen boughs. Sarah and Nathan sat near the back, listening to the familiar carols and readings. The simple beauty of the service, the sense of community and hope, created an atmosphere of reflective peace. Afterward, as they walked home through the crisp, star-filled night, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, Nathan suddenly stopped walking. "Sarah," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "there's something I need to say to you." She turned to face him, her heart quickening at his serious expression. "Yes? I'm not good with words," he began, his brow furrowed with concentration. "Never have been. But I need you to know—" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "When you came to Riverdale, I was existing, not living, just getting through each day, hiding in the forge, avoiding people's stares." Sarah waited, sensing the importance of what he was trying to express. "Then you walked in, looking for work," he continued, "and you saw me. Not my scars, not what I'd lost, but what remained, who I was, beneath it all." His voice roughened with emotion. No one had done that in years. "Nathan, please let me finish while I have the courage." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Sarah Miller. I don't have much to offer, just the forge, my hands, my heart. It's not the life Wilson could give you, but it would be a life with someone who sees all that you are and finds it beautiful." The words hung in the cold night air between them, fragile and powerful. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so intense it was, almost painful. "When I came here," she said softly, "I thought finding a husband was my only chance for a future. I was willing to marry a stranger because I believed I had no value beyond being someone's wife." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line where scarred tissue met smooth skin. "You showed me that I was wrong, that I am capable, strong, worthy in my own right." Nathan's good eyes searched her face, hope warring with uncertainty. "And then," Sarah continued, "when I no longer needed a husband to validate my existence, I found myself wanting one anyway. But not just any husband, a specific one. A man of courage and integrity who looks at me and sees everything I am, everything I could be. Sarah, I love you too, Nathan Green. Your scars, your strength, your heart, all of you." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, as if neither could quite believe this moment was real. Then it deepened. Years of loneliness, dissolving in the warmth of connection found at last. When they finally drew apart, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not because you need to, but because you want to." "Yes," Sarah answered simply. "Because I want to." They were married on New Year's Day, in the same church where they had attended Christmas Eve service. The ceremony was small but well attended, with most of Riverdale turning out to witness the union of the scarred blacksmith and the plain bookkeeper who had found in each other what the rest of the world had been too blind to see. Mrs. Hathaway and Porter exchanged knowing glances during the vows. The little girl Nathan had saved from the schoolhouse fire, now a young woman with children of her own, placed flowers on the altar in his honor. Even James Wilson attended, standing at the back with an expression that had softened from resentment to something like acceptance. As Sarah and Nathan spoke their vows, snow began to fall outside the church windows. Not the violent blizzard that had thrown them together that first night, but gentle, easy flakes that transformed the world into something clean and new. And if anyone in Riverdale still thought of Sarah Miller as plain or Nathan Green as disfigured, they kept such thoughts to themselves. For what was visible to everyone that day was not the appearance of the bride and groom, but the unmistakable radiance of two people who had found in each other's eyes the recognition every heart longs for. To be truly seen exactly as they are, and loved not in spite of their supposed flaws, but with a depth that renders such judgments meaningless. Spring arrived in Riverdale with a gentle persistence, melting the deep snow into rushing streams and coaxing green shoots from the thawing earth. The forge blazed as always, but the doors now stood open to the warm breeze, and Sarah had placed pots of wildflowers along the window ledges, splashes of color against the weathered wood and iron. The first anniversary of her arrival in Montana territory had passed quietly. She and Nathan had marked the occasion with a private dinner in their new home, a sturdy cabin built over the winter months on a small plot of land adjacent to the forge. The dwelling was modest but thoughtfully designed, with large windows to capture the mountain light and built-in bookshelves that Nathan had crafted to house Sarah's growing collection. Marriage had changed them both in subtle ways. Nathan spoke more, smiled more, and had begun to engage with townspeople beyond the necessary interactions of business. Sarah stood taller, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that no longer surprised her. Together, they had created something neither had believed possible, a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The forge itself had transformed as well. What had once been solely a blacksmith shop now included a small section devoted to books and stationery, Sarah's addition, inspired by her father's shop back east. The venture had begun modestly, with a few volumes ordered to meet her own reading needs, but had expanded when other residents expressed interest. Now the newest novels from New York and Boston arrived monthly, alongside catalogs, writing paper, and educational texts for the growing community. On this particular morning, Sarah was arranging a shipment of freshly arrived books when a stranger entered the shop. Tall and well-dressed with the careful grooming of a city dweller, he stood out immediately in the rural setting of Riverdale. "Good morning," Sarah greeted him with a shopkeeper's smile. "How may I help you?" The man removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair and intelligent eyes that swept the interior of the forge with evident curiosity. "Mrs. Green, I presume?" Sarah nodded, setting aside the ledger she'd been updating. "Yes, and you, huh?" "Frederick Holloway." He extended a gloved hand, which Sarah shook briefly. "I represent Western Publishing House in Denver. I'm here on rather unusual business." From the rear of the forge, where he had been working on an ornate iron gate commissioned by the new bank, Nathan appeared, his expression guarded as he took in the stranger. Years of being stared at had made him wary of unfamiliar faces. "My husband," Sarah explained, gesturing toward Nathan, who wiped his hands on his apron before approaching. To his credit, Holloway's gaze didn't linger on Nathan's scarred face, nor did he exhibit the momentary flinch that many strangers couldn't suppress. Instead, he offered a brisk nod and a firm handshake. "Mr. Green, I've heard remarkable things about your ironwork. The bank president in Helena speaks highly of the chandelier you crafted for their new building. Nathan's eyebrow rose slightly at this unexpected praise. Thank you. Holloway turned his attention back to Sarah. As I was saying, I'm here on unusual business. We've received correspondence from a Mrs. Eliza Hathaway regarding a story she thought might interest our publishing house. Sarah exchanged a puzzled glance with Nathan. Mrs. Hathaway? From the Riverdale Inn? The very same. She wrote to us about a mail-order bride who was rejected upon arrival for being too plain, only to find unexpected happiness with a scarred blacksmith who saw beyond appearances. Holloway smiled slightly. Your story, as I understand it. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Our story is hardly the stuff of literature, Mr. Holloway. On the contrary, the publisher countered, stories of the Western Territories are in high demand back east, particularly those featuring strong women carving out new lives on the frontier. Mrs. Hathaway provided quite a compelling outline. Nathan frowned. What exactly are you proposing? Western Publishing House would like to include your story in an upcoming collection, True Tales of Western Courage. With your permission, of course, and with proper compensation. Holloway reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document. We're prepared to offer $50 for the rights. The sum was substantial, nearly a month's profit from the forge. Sarah and Nathan exchanged another look, a silent conversation passing between them. Why? Nathan asked finally. What's so interesting about us? Holloway considered the question thoughtfully. People are drawn to stories of transformation. Mr. Green, of second chances and unexpected joy. In a world that often judges by appearance, tales that challenge those superficial values resonate deeply. He glanced between them. And frankly, Mrs. Hathaway writes a compelling letter. Despite her initial embarrassment, Sarah found herself intrigued. Would our names be used? That would be your choice. We could use pseudonyms, if you prefer. Nathan's discomfort was evident in his posture, in the way his hand unconsciously moved toward the scarred side of his face. I don't like the idea of being exhibited. I understand your reservation, Holloway said with surprising gentleness. But consider this. Somewhere, there's another scarred veteran who believes his life is over. Somewhere there's a woman, deemed too plain, who's accepted that judgment as truth. Perhaps your story might reach them. The words hung in the air, weighty with possibility. Sarah remembered the crushing disappointment of James Wilson's rejection, the humiliation that had nearly broken her spirit. She thought of Nathan, hiding in his forge for years, avoiding the stares and whispers. We'll need to discuss it, she said finally. Can you return tomorrow for our answer? Holloway nodded, placing the contract on the counter. Of course, I'm staying at the Riverdale Inn. Take all the time you need to decide. He replaced his hat and offered a polite nod. Good day to you both. After he had gone, the forge seemed unusually quiet, despite the crackling fire and the distant sound of birdsong through the open door. Nathan returned to his work without a comment, the rhythmic striking of his hammer filling the silence with familiar music. Sarah watched him for a moment, noting the tension in his shoulders, before returning to her books. They would talk later, when the working day was done. Some conversations required the privacy of home and hearth. That evening, as they sat on the small porch of their cabin, watching twilight paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Sarah finally broached the subject. What do you think about Mr. Holloway's proposal? Nathan was silent for a long moment, his fingers absently tracing the pattern he had forged into their porch railing, intertwined vines and leaves that represented their life together. I don't like the idea of strangers reading about us, he said finally. Judging us. They would judge the story, not us, Sarah pointed out gently. And we could use different names, as he suggested. Why does it appeal to you? Nathan asked, turning to study her face in the fading light. The idea of sharing our story. Sarah considered her answer carefully. When I first arrived here, I believed what others had always told me, that I was unremarkable, insufficient. That belief nearly crushed me. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Then you saw me differently, and gradually I began to see myself differently too. And you think our story might do that for others? Perhaps. Isn't that worth the discomfort of sharing it? Nathan's expression softened as he looked at her. This woman who had brought light and purpose back into his life. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? The following morning, they gave Holloway their answer, with specific conditions. Their real names would not be used, certain private details would remain private, and they would review the final text before publication. The publisher readily agreed, producing a revised contract that Sarah read thoroughly before they signed. The collection should be published by Christmas, Holloway informed them, carefully folding the signed agreement into his coat pocket. I'll send a copy when it's available. Life returned to its familiar rhythm after Holloway's departure. The forge remained busy with orders, the book corner drew regular customers, and Sarah and Nathan continued building their life together. One day at a time, summer brought new visitors to Riverdale. Travelers heading further west, businessmen investigating investments in the growing territory, families seeking fresh starts. Among them was a young woman who entered the forge one hot afternoon in July, her face partially concealed by a heavy veil. "May I help you?" Sarah asked, setting aside the inventory list she'd been working on. The woman hesitated before raising her veil, revealing a face marked by severe burn scars across one cheek and jaw. She couldn't have been more than 20, and her eyes held the wariness of someone accustomed to stares and whispers. "I need something repaired," she said quietly, placing a small silver locket on the counter. "The hinge is broken." Sarah examined the piece. "My husband can certainly fix this. He's excellent with delicate work." "Your husband?" "Nathan Green, the blacksmith." Sarah gestured toward the forge area, where Nathan was visible working. On a decorative iron fence panel, the young woman stiffened slightly as she caught sight of Nathan's profile, the scarred side of his face clearly visible from where she stood. "He was injured saving children from a fire," Sarah explained, noting the woman's reaction. "He's the finest craftsman in the territory and the bravest man I know." Something flickered in the young woman's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or hope. "A fire," she repeated softly. "Mine too. Our home burned when I was 16. Everyone said. I was lucky to survive, but sometimes..." She trailed off, fingers unconsciously touching her scarred cheek. "Sometimes you don't feel lucky at all," Sarah finished gently. "I understand, or rather, my husband does." The woman, Emily Taylor, as Sarah would later learn, became a regular visitor to the forge. Initially, she came with small repair requests, then for books, and eventually simply to talk. Nathan, usually reticent with strangers, found himself sharing his experiences with the young woman, how he had learned to face the world again, how to bear the stares and whispers, how to find purpose beyond his scars. "You make it sound possible," Emily said one afternoon as the three of them shared tea in the book corner. "Having a normal life despite..." She gestured vaguely toward her face. "Not despite," Nathan corrected quietly. "Including. Your scars are part of you, not separate from you. The right people will understand that. Like Sarah understood. With you." Nathan glanced at his wife, his expression softening. "Sarah saw me when I'd forgotten how to see myself. That's rare. but there are others who can see beyond surface appearances. Emily's visits continued through the summer and into autumn. With each visit, she seemed to stand a little taller, speak a little more confidently. She began helping in the book corner when shipments arrived, her knowledge of literature proving valuable as she recommended titles to customers. "Have you considered staying in Riverdale permanently?" Sarah asked her one crisp October day, as they unpacked a crate of new books. "You have a gift for this work." Emily hesitated. "I've thought about it. My aunt in Denver has been kind, letting me live with her these past years, but it's not home," Sarah finished, understanding in her voice. "And you want a home of your own. Is that foolish? To think I might have that someday. Not foolish at all." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on the younger woman's arm. "When I came here, I thought my only value was in being someone's wife. I couldn't imagine the life I have now. Work I love, a community that respects me, a husband who sees me for who I truly am." "You were lucky to find Nathan." "It wasn't luck," Sarah said thoughtfully. "It was recognition. Two people who had been invisible to others, suddenly visible to each other." The conversation stayed with Sarah long after Emily had gone. That evening, as she and Nathan sat by their hearth, she shared an idea that had been forming in her mind. "What would you think about expanding the book corner, making it a proper bookshop with a separate entrance from the forge?" Nathan looked up from the chess piece he was carving, a hobby he had taken up during the previous winter. "You want your own business?" "Our business," Sarah clarified, "but with Emily Taylor managing the day-to-day operations." Understanding dawned in Nathan's expression. "You want to give her a purpose, a place. She has a gift for books, and she needs something that's hers." Sarah leaned forward, enthusiasm warming her voice. "We could use that empty space on the east side of the forge. It wouldn't take much to convert it. Some shelving, a counter, a stove for heat." Nathan considered the proposal, mentally calculating costs and logistics. It could work, he acknowledged. But would she accept such an offer? She has her pride. "As a business partnership, not charity," Sarah insisted. "She invests her time and expertise. We provide the space and initial inventory. She keeps a percentage of the profits." A smile tugged at the corner of Nathan's mouth. "You've thought this through." "Is that a yes?" "It's an I trust your judgment," he replied, reaching for her hand. "If you believe in her, that's enough. For me." Emily's reaction to their proposal exceeded even Sarah's optimistic expectations. The young woman's eyes filled with tears as she grasped the opportunity being offered, not merely employment, but partnership. A chance to build something of her own. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "You barely know me." "We know enough," Nathan said simply. "You're strong, resilient. You deserve a chance to show what you can do." Work began immediately on converting the unused space adjacent to the forge into a proper bookshop. Nathan designed and built the shelving and counters himself, while Sarah and Emily developed a more extensive inventory plan, focusing on titles that would appeal to Riverdale's growing population. As word of the new venture spread through town, something unexpected happened. Offers of help began to arrive. Mr. Porter from the general store donated paint for the walls. Mrs. Finch created curtains for the windows. The carpenter's apprentice volunteered to lay the new wooden floor. People who had once stared at Emily's scars now greeted her with genuine interest in the upcoming shop. "I don't understand," Emily confessed to Sarah one evening as they sorted books for the opening. "Why is everyone being so kind?" Sarah glanced through the open doorway that connected the new shop to the forge, where Nathan was installing the iron stove that would heat the space through the coming winter. "Riverdale wasn't always kind to Nathan or to me when I first arrived," she said thoughtfully. But people can change when given the chance to see differently. Is that why you're helping me to change how people see? Partly, Sarah admitted, but mostly because everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not just for what shows on the surface. The bookshop, named Second Chapters at Emily's suggestion, opened the first week of November, just as the first snow dusted the mountains surrounding Riverdale. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, filling the small space with warmth and conversation. Sarah watched with quiet pride as Emily moved confidently among the customers, recommending titles and answering questions. The young woman's scars were still visible, but somehow less defining now. Just one aspect of a person who was increasingly known for her intelligence, her literary knowledge, her gentle humor. "She reminds me of you," Nathan murmured, appearing at Sarah's side with 2 cups of cider. "When you first started working at the forge, uncertain at first, then finding your footing." Sarah accepted the cider gratefully. "She's braver than I was." "I disagree," Nathan said, his gaze warm as it rested on his wife. "It took tremendous courage to stay in Riverdale after Wilson's rejection, to seek work in a blacksmith's shop, to see beyond this." He gestured briefly toward his scarred face. "Not courage," Sarah corrected softly. "Recognition. I recognize something in you that others missed." As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed James Wilson among the crowd, examining a shelf of history books with apparent interest. He had kept his distance since their wedding, his pride still wounded by her rejection, but his presence at the shop opening suggested a tentative step toward reconciliation. Eventually, he approached the counter where Sarah was wrapping a customer's purchase. "Quite an enterprise you've built here," he observed, his tone carefully neutral. "First the forge, now a bookshop. Riverdale is changing." "For the better, I hope," Sarah replied, equally careful. Wilson's gaze shifted to Emily, who was helping an elderly customer find a specific title. "Your new associate. She seems capable, despite her difficulty." "Emily Taylor is exceptionally capable," Sarah said firmly, "and her scars are a testament to her survival, not a difficulty." Wilson had the grace to look abashed. "That was poorly phrased. I apologize." Sarah studied him for a moment, noting subtle changes in his appearance. He seemed less rigid somehow, the arrogance that had once defined him softened by time or experience. "You're looking well, James," she offered, extending an olive branch. "The ranch must be prospering." "It is." He hesitated, then added, "Though I find myself with less interest in cattle and more in community matters these days. I've been elected to the town council." "Congratulations. That suits your talents." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken history. Finally, Wilson cleared his throat. "I received word that Western Publishing House will be releasing a collection of frontier stories this Christmas. Rumor has it that Riverdale features prominently." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face, because Wilson added quickly, "Frederick. Holloway and I served together during the war. He mentioned his visit here." "I see." Sarah wasn't certain how to respond to this unexpected connection. "Yes. A story inspired by local events will be included." "Your story," Wilson clarified, his expression unreadable. "And Green's, with names changed," Sarah confirmed. "For privacy," Wilson nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad Holloway convinced you to share it. There's value in such accounts." Before Sarah could respond to this unexpected sentiment, Wilson was called away by another council member. She watched him go, reflecting on how life's path could twist in such unexpected ways. The man whose rejection had once devastated her was now just another townsperson, his power over her happiness long dissipated. The bookshop opening extended well into the evening, the small space filled with conversation and laughter. When the last customer had finally departed, Sarah, Nathan, and Emily collapsed into chairs around the new stove, exhausted but exhilarated. "I can't believe how many books we sold," Emily marveled, looking around at the depleted shelves. "We'll need to order more immediately." "A good problem to have," Nathan observed, stoking the fire against the chill night air. "This is just the beginning," Sarah said, her voice warm with certainty. "I have a feeling second chapters has many stories yet to tell." As winter settled over Riverdale, the bookshop quickly became a community gathering place. On snowy evenings, residents would stop by to browse new titles, exchange news, or simply enjoy the warmth and companionship. Sarah organized weekly reading circles for children, while Emily started a literary discussion group for adults. The Forge continued to thrive as well, with Nathan's reputation spreading throughout the territory. Orders arrived from as far away as Helena and Butte, often requesting the distinctive blend of functionality and artistry that had become his trademark. December brought the promised package from Western Publishing House, a handsomely bound volume titled True Tales of Western Courage. Sarah found their story, now titled The Blacksmith's Vision, nestled between accounts of pioneer women and frontier justice. Reading it was a strange experience, seeing their personal journey transformed into literature, their private moments now shared with unknown readers across the country. "What do you think?" she asked Nathan that evening, as they sat by their hearth with the open book between them. He was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered the question. "It's strange," he admitted finally. "Seeing our life through someone else's eyes. Holloway did a fair job, I think. He kept his promise about privacy." Nathan nodded slowly. "Yes, and perhaps..." He paused, searching for words. "Perhaps there is value in sharing how two people can see each other clearly, even when the rest of the world looks past them." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that had become as natural as breathing. "I hope someone finds comfort in it. Someone who needs to know that being seen for who you truly are is possible." "Like Emily found comfort in seeing us," Nathan observed. "Sometimes a living example speaks louder than words on a page." As if summoned by their conversation, a knock sounded at their door. Nathan rose to answer it, returning moments later, with Emily and an unexpected guest, Frederick Holloway, looking travel-worn but pleased. "I hope we're not intruding," Emily said, brushing snow from her coat. Mr. Holloway arrived on the evening stage with news. The publisher stepped forward, removing his hat with a flourish. "Excellent news, in fact. True Tales has been extraordinarily well received back east. Your story in particular has generated considerable interest." Sarah gestured for their visitors to sit, moving to prepare coffee for the cold travelers. "What kind of interest?" "Letters," Holloway explained, accepting a seat by the fire. "Dozens of them addressed to the blacksmith and his bride. Readers wanting to know more about your journey, sharing their own experiences of being judged by appearance." He reached into his satchel and withdrew a bundle of letters tied with string. "The publishing house thought you might want to see them, given your interest in the story's impact." Nathan accepted the bundle with obvious surprise. "All these are for us?" "Indeed, and more arriving weekly." Holloway accepted the coffee Sarah offered with a grateful nod. "Which brings me to my proposal. Western Publishing House would like to commission a full-length book, your complete story, with your guidance and approval at every stage." The offer hung in the air, unexpected and momentous. Sarah and Nathan exchanged a glance, their silent communication perfected over months of partnership. "Why us?" Nathan asked finally, echoing the question he had posed during Holloway's first visit. "Surely there are more dramatic tales of the frontier." Drama isn't what readers are responding to, Holloway explained, warming his hands around the coffee cup. It's the authenticity, the recognition that true beauty lies beneath the surface, visible only to those who take the time to truly see. He gestured toward the letters. Each of these represents someone whose life was touched by that message. Emily, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. When I first came to Riverdale, I believed my scars had defined my future. A lifetime of stares and pity, of being overlooked or avoided. Her voice strengthened as she continued. Seeing you both, how you had built a life of meaning and joy despite what others perceived as limitations. It changed everything for me. She reached up unconsciously to touch her scarred cheek, a gesture that had once been self-conscious but now seemed merely thoughtful. If your story in this small book could reach me, imagine what a complete account might do for others who believe themselves unseen or unworthy. Sarah felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest, the same sensation she had experienced when Nathan first looked at her and truly saw beyond her plain exterior to the strength within. The idea that their personal journey might illuminate a path for others who struggled with being overlooked or judged was powerful and humbling. We would need time to consider this, she said finally, looking to Nathan for confirmation. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Of course, Holloway agreed, setting down his empty cup. The project wouldn't begin until spring in any case. I'll be traveling through Riverdale again in March and can discuss details then, should you decide to proceed. After their visitors had departed, Sarah and Nathan sat in comfortable silence, the bundle of letters untouched between them. Outside, snow fell in gentle persistence, blanketing Riverdale in pristine white that would transform the familiar landscape. By morning, should we read them? Sarah asked eventually, nodding toward the letters. Nathan considered the question, his scarred face thoughtful in the firelight. Yes, he decided. If our story has touched these people, we owe it to them to hear what they have to say. They spent the evening reading letter after letter from a young woman with a birthmark who had never believed love was possible for her, from a veteran whose war injuries had left him feeling less than whole, from a mother whose plain daughter had been passed over by suitors time and again. Each letter spoke of recognition, of the profound human need to be truly seen beyond surface appearances. The final letter they opened was different from the others, written on expensive stationery in an elegant feminine hand. The writer identified herself only as a woman who chose wrongly, but her message was clear. She had once rejected a good man because of scars similar to Nathan's, choosing instead a handsome, wealthy suitor whose cruelty she had discovered. Too late. Your story haunts me, she wrote, not with regret for what might have been, but with hope that others might learn what I failed to understand, that beauty without kindness is no beauty at all, and that scars can mark the most worthy souls. Sarah folded the letter carefully, returning it to its envelope before meeting Nathan's gaze across the hearth. What do you think about Holloway's proposal? Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his expression softened by what they had read. I think, he said finally, that if sharing our journey might help even one person see differently, either themselves or others, then perhaps we have a responsibility to do so. Sarah nodded, understanding completely. Not for fame or fortune. No, Nathan agreed, for recognition, for those who need to be seen and those who need to learn how to see. Outside, the snow continued its gentle descent, transforming Riverdale into something new yet familiar, much as Sarah and Nathan's unexpected love had transformed them both. The forge stood quiet for the night, its fires banked, but ready to blaze again with morning's light. Beside it, The bookshop waited with its shelves of stories, each offering its own kind of vision to those willing to look beyond the surface. And in their small cabin, warmed by firelight and shared purpose, Sarah and Nathan Green contemplated the unexpected path that had brought them here. A path that had begun with rejection and loneliness, but had led to something far more valuable than either could have imagined: the profound gift of being truly seen and the opportunity to extend that gift to others who still waited in the shadows, hoping to be recognized at last. 5 years passed in Riverdale, marking the landscape and its inhabitants with subtle changes that only became apparent when one paused to reflect on what had been. The town had grown, spreading outward from its original boundaries as new businesses and homes appeared along freshly laid streets. The Northern Pacific Railway had expanded its service, bringing more travelers and settlers to the once isolated community. Progress, with all its complications and benefits, had firmly established itself in Montana territory. On a warm summer afternoon, Sarah sat on the wide porch of what was now called Greenhouse, a two-story home that stood where their modest cabin had once been. She was reading aloud from a leather-bound volume, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Beside her, Nathan worked on a delicate iron sculpture, his scarred hands manipulating the metal with practiced precision. And so they found, in each other's eyes, what the world had failed to see. Not perfect features or flawless skin, but the far more precious beauty of true recognition. Sarah closed the book, running her fingers over the embossed title, Seeing Clearly, a Blacksmith's Journey. Still strange to hear our lives in those pages, Nathan observed, setting aside his work, even after all this time. Sarah smiled, understanding his sentiment completely. When they had finally agreed to Holloway's proposal for a full-length book about their experiences, neither had anticipated its impact. What began as a simple account of their journey had become something of a phenomenon, particularly among those who felt marginalized by society's narrow definitions of worth and beauty. 4 printings now, she said, placing the book on the small table between their chairs. And letters still arriving weekly. Those letters had become a fixture in their lives, correspondence from readers across the country who found hope in their story. Some came from veterans with visible wounds, others from women deemed too plain or too old by societal standards. Each expressed gratitude for the simple message at the heart of their narrative. The true sight comes not from the eyes, but from the heart. Emily's bringing the Harper children for their reading lesson this afternoon, Sarah reminded him, rising, to check the plate of cookies cooling in the kitchen. And don't forget the town council meeting tonight. Nathan nodded, his expression wry. How could I forget? Wilson's railroad proposal needs countering. The mention of James Wilson no longer carried emotional weight for either of them. Over the years, the wealthy rancher had transformed from romantic rival to community leader too, eventually something resembling a friend. His initial proposal to bring a spur line through the center of town, displacing several businesses in the process, had met resistance from Nathan and other council members, leading to weeks of heated debate. He'll come around to the eastern route, Sarah predicted, returning with the cookies and a pitcher of lemonade, especially after Emily presents the petition. The second chapter's bookshop had flourished beyond their expectations, expanding twice to accommodate growing inventory and community programs. Emily Taylor, now Emily Collins, following her marriage to the carpenter's apprentice who had laid the shop's original floor, had proven herself not just a capable manager, but a genuine community leader. Her literary groups had evolved into civic engagement, her quiet voice carrying surprising weight in town decisions. The sound of approaching voices announced the arrival of the reading students, 5 children ranging in age from 6 to 12, led by a visibly pregnant Emily. The children raced ahead, eager for their weekly lesson in the shade of Greenhouse's porch, while Emily followed at a more measured pace. Mrs. Green, the youngest child, a freckled girl named Margaret, called out. "Is it true your story's going to be in a moving picture show?" Sarah exchanged an amused glance with Nathan. "Where did you hear such a thing, Margaret?" "My pa said a man from California was asking at the hotel about the book," the child explained, climbing onto the porch steps. "Said he wanted to make it into one of those new picture stories." Emily reached the porch, slightly breathless from the summer heat. "I see Margaret's sharing the latest gossip. It's all anyone's talking about at the bookshop today." "Pure speculation," Nathan said firmly, though Sarah noticed he didn't dismiss the possibility outright. The previous year, a photographer from Harper's Weekly had visited Riverdale to capture images for an article about Western success stories, focusing particularly on second chapters and the Green Forge. The resulting publicity had brought a wave of curiosity seekers to town, along with increased orders for Nathan's ironwork from as far away as San Francisco. "Well, speculation can wait," Sarah declared, arranging chairs for the children. "We have reading to do." As the lesson progressed, Sarah found herself occasionally distracted by thoughts of how profoundly their lives had changed from those first difficult days in Riverdale. What had begun with rejection and humiliation had transformed into something neither she nor Nathan could have imagined, not just personal happiness, but a ripple effect touching countless lives. The Forge, now managed primarily by Nathan's apprentice, while Nathan focused on commissioned artistic pieces, had become known throughout the West for its distinctive ironwork. Second chapters had spawned a small publishing venture for local writers and historians. And Greenhouse had become something of a way station for those seeking guidance after reading their story. Scarred veterans learning new trades, women establishing independent businesses, individuals challenging society's limitations. Later that evening, after the children had gone and Emily had departed with promises to meet them at the council meeting, Sarah and Nathan sat together watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of amber and purple. These quiet moments remained precious to them both, islands of peace in increasingly busy lives. "Do you ever wonder," Sarah asked softly, "what would have happened if James Wilson had accepted me that first day at the station?" Nathan considered the question seriously, as was his way. "Sometimes," he admitted. "You might have had an easier life, comfortable, secure. But not happy," Sarah said with certainty. "Not truly seen." "No," Nathan agreed, reaching for her hand. "Not seen as I see you." The simple statement encompassed everything that had defined their journey together. The recognition that had bloomed between them when the rest of the world had looked past them both. As twilight deepened into dusk, they prepared to head into town for the council meeting. The issue of the railroad spur was important to Riverdale's future, requiring their attention and advocacy. Years of community respect had transformed Nathan. From the solitary blacksmith avoiding human contact into a voice people listened to with genuine consideration. They walked together down the path from Greenhouse, arms linked comfortably. Ahead, Riverdale's lights twinkled in the gathering darkness, a constellation of human endeavor against the vast Montana night. The town had changed, as had they, but the essential truth they had discovered together remained constant. Beauty, true beauty, exists not in perfect features or flawless skin, but in the profound connection that happens when one soul truly recognizes another. Their story, once private and painful, had become a beacon for others navigating the difficult terrain of judgment and rejection. Through their book, through second chapters, through the quiet examples of their daily lives, Sarah and Nathan continued to offer the same message: look beyond the surface, see with the heart, recognize the worth that others miss, And in that recognition, that plain truth of beauty, they had found not just personal happiness, but a purpose larger than themselves, a legacy that would endure long after their footprints faded from Riverdale's streets. For every letter that arrived, every visitor who sought them out, every life touched by their journey, was proof that the most profound transformations begin with the simplest of actions, truly seeing another person and allowing oneself to be truly seen. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.